My daughter told me dinner was canceled, that the restaurant had lost power and everything was postponed. But hours later, I stood outside those glass doors watching her and her husband laughing, feasting, raising glasses of wine, and I could see the waiter swipe my card like I was nothing more than their bank. And in that moment, I knew something had broken forever. Thank you for watching and for giving me your time. It means more than you know. And before I go deeper into my story, I would love to know where you are watching from. So please share it in the comments because it makes me feel less alone when I tell these things from my heart. That night when I saw them inside the restaurant, using my card, I did not storm in or shout. Instead, I stood quietly, holding every piece of hurt inside me. And I thought of all the years I worked, saved, and sacrificed, just so she could have better. And now here I was, left out, lied to, erased from the table I had always paid for, yet still expected to foot the bill. I was born in a time when nothing came easy, when every coin had to be stretched and every meal was the result of long hours bent over work that left my hands rough and my back aching, and through it all I kept my head high because I had a reason. I had her. I raised my daughter with everything I had, not just money, but patience, sleepless nights, quiet prayers whispered into the dark, and sacrifices no one else would ever know. I gave up new dresses so she could have school books. I turned down outings so she could attend field trips, and when bills stacked higher than I could manage, I found a way. Even if it meant taking on work others would turn their nose at. I thought it would matter one day, that she would see the difference between love freely given and a hand stretched out only to take. I thought she would understand the weight a mother carries and the joy that comes from lightening that load with a simple thank you. As she grew, I saw ambition in her, a spark that I believed would carry her far. And I nurtured it with everything inside me, because I wanted her to walk through doors I never even had the chance to knock on. I wanted her to have respect, comfort, and dignity in a world that too often tried to deny those things. But what I did not see back then was how entitlement slowly took root, how gratitude slipped away little by little, replaced with expectations until the giving was no longer a gift, but an obligation. I became the purse that never closed, the answer to every financial gap, the one they counted on without ever stopping to ask if I was all right, if I had enough left for myself. Still, I carried on, telling myself it was love, that mothers are meant to give without limit, that one day she would come back to me, not with demands, but with care, with understanding, with the kind of kindness that repays years of sacrifice in a single gesture. Yet standing there, outside that restaurant window, the reflection of my tired face in the glass staring back at me, I realized love had been taken for granted. She had not just lied about dinner being canceled, she had chosen to erase me from the table, to laugh while I sat at home eating leftovers, to swipe my card while pretending I was not worth a seat beside her. That kind of betrayal does not come in a sudden strike. It builds from years of small cuts, from every time I was used instead of cherished. And now it bled openly before my eyes. I stayed still that night, breathing in the cold air, steadying my heart, because I knew something had shifted. The years of silent endurance were over, and what lay ahead would not be shouting, it would not be scenes of chaos, it would be something far more powerful. It would be silence laced with resolve, and decisions made with a steady hand. And in that moment, with the sound of their laughter spilling out of the restaurant, I promised myself I would never again let them eat from my plate while starving my soul. The invitation to that dinner had felt like a small spark of joy in my week, something to look forward to. A chance to sit among them and share a meal where maybe, just maybe, I would not only be paying, but also belonging. I remember pressing my dress the night before, smoothing every wrinkle as if the fabric itself held my hope, and setting aside my pearl earrings that I had not worn in years, telling myself that this night might be one to remember. When the phone rang that afternoon and she told me the dinner was canceled, her voice carried a strange tone, light but hurried, and she said the restaurant had lost power, so there was no point in going. I believed her. Because that is what mothers do. They trust, they give the benefit of the doubt, and they try not to question every word that comes from their own child. I tried to swallow the disappointment, to push down the sting that came with taking off those earrings and putting away the dress, folding back the small excitement I had allowed myself to feel. I told myself that maybe another night would come, that she would reschedule, that this was only bad luck and not bad intention. I warmed up leftovers, sat quietly at the table, and watered the plants by the window, all the while trying to convince myself that canceled dinners happen. And it was nothing more than that. But in my chest, a heaviness sat, the kind that does not leave with reassurances, the kind that tells you there is something more beneath the surface. I might have let the night pass in silence if not for the voice in me that pushed for answers. And so I picked up my phone and opened the reservation app. Curious, more than suspicious, but as the screen lit up, I saw the truth sitting there plainly. The table was still booked, the dinner had not been canceled at all, and in that moment the heaviness inside me turned sharp. I sat back, holding the phone in my hand, staring at the screen as if the letters themselves were trying to mock me. It was no mistake, no misunderstanding. It was a choice, and the betrayal felt heavier than any load I had carried before. I did not shout or call. I did not confront her through the phone. Instead, I picked up my keys, walked to my car, and drove quietly to the restaurant. Each mile felt longer than the last. Every turn was filled with thoughts of what I might see, what I might learn, and part of me still prayed I was wrong. But when I pulled up outside and saw the lights shining warmly through the windows, heard the clinking of glasses and the hum of voices spilling out into the night air, I knew there would be no comfort in pretending anymore. What waited for me inside those walls would change everything, and my heart braced for the truth it already knew. When I stepped out of the car and walked closer to the glowing windows of that restaurant, the air felt colder than it had only moments before, as if the night itself was warning me of the chill waiting inside my heart. I stood there for a moment, gathering my breath, and then I moved to the side where I could see clearly through the glass. What I saw pressed against me like a weight I could not push away. There they were, my daughter, her husband, and his family, all seated around a table overflowing with plates of food, their faces lit by the warm golden lights, their hands raised as glasses clinked in a toast that I was never meant to hear. Their laughter rose and spilled out as if the night belonged to them, as if my absence was not an accident but a relief. And I realized with a pain deeper than words that this dinner had always been meant to exclude me. My eyes lingered on my daughter's smile, the very smile I had worked so hard to protect and nurture through every hardship, and in that moment it felt unfamiliar, almost foreign, as if the bond we once shared had been quietly severed without my knowing. I watched her lean toward her husband, whisper something, and laugh again, and the sound, even muffled through the glass, struck me like a blade. Then came the final cut, the one that pierced deeper than all the rest. I saw the waiter approach the table, carrying the small black folder, and I saw my daughter slip out my card, the one I had given her for emergencies, the one I had trusted her to respect. He swiped it without hesitation, and I felt the truth wash over me with a bitter certainty. They had lied to me, erased me, and yet still felt entitled to my sacrifice. I stood there quietly, my reflection staring back at me from the glass, and in those few seconds the years passed before my eyes. Every sleepless night, every double shift, every coin stretched thin so that she would never go without. And now she had chosen to make me invisible at the very table I had unknowingly paid for. The humiliation did not come from the lie itself, but from the ease with which she carried it, the casual way she lifted her glass, knowing I was at home eating leftovers, while my money bought her feast. I did not cry. I did not bang on the door or call her name, because something inside me knew there was no dignity in begging for a place at a table where you are not wanted. Instead, I let the hurt settle deep within me, shaping itself into something far stronger than anger. I turned slowly from the window, my steps steady, because I knew then that I would not fight with raised voice or wild gestures. I would answer this betrayal in silence, and the silence would echo louder than any scene I could make that night. I walked away from that window with the weight of their laughter still ringing in my ears, each step carrying me further from the glow of the restaurant, but deeper into the shadows of my own thoughts. I held my coat tighter around me, not because the night was cold, but because I needed something to hold on to, something to keep me from crumbling right there on the sidewalk. My chest ached, my throat tightened, but no tears came, only a silence that felt heavier than any sob I could have released. I told myself, again and again, that if I broke down now, they would never see it. They would never know the depth of this wound, because my pain belonged to me, and I would not give them the satisfaction of owning it. As I reached my car and sat behind the wheel, the stillness pressed against me like a storm waiting to break. I thought of the countless dinners before this one, dinners I had paid for gladly, watching them order dishes I would never buy for myself, smiling while my card slid through the machine again and again, believing it was all worth it if it meant my daughter was happy. I thought of the times she promised she would pay me back, the times she swore she would include me, and how each promise vanished like smoke. That night, staring through the windshield at the restaurant lights, I realized those promises had never been for me. They had only been for her convenience, words thrown out to quiet my doubts until she no longer needed even the effort of pretending. I sat there in the silence, and it became clear to me that humiliation is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is being erased without even a word spoken, left on the outside while the very people you gave everything to pretend you no longer exist. Yet inside that humiliation there was also a spark, faint but growing, a reminder that I still had power, that I was not the weak, forgotten woman they imagined me to be. I breathed deeply, steadying myself, because I knew this was not the end of the story. This was the beginning of a decision that would change everything. They had chosen to feast without me, to laugh while I stood in the shadows. But I would make sure that the silence I carried away from that window would be the silence that echoed back into their lives louder than their laughter ever had. I left the car parked a little down the street and walked back slowly. Not to the window this time, but to the front door, where the warm light spilled out every time someone entered or left, and I stood for a moment with my hand on the handle before I turned away and chose a different path. I made my way inside through a quieter entrance, where I knew the staff passed in and out, and there I found the manager, a man who had known me for years, a man who had seen me come in on Sundays after church with friends long gone now. He looked at me with surprise, then with concern, and when he asked if I was all right, I only gave him a small smile, the kind of smile that hides more than it reveals. I told him I needed the bill for the table under my daughter's name, and he looked at me carefully before nodding, as if he understood more than I was willing to say. When he returned and placed the slip in my hand, the numbers did not surprise me. Bottle after bottle of wine, plates of food I could never bring myself to order, desserts stacked high, the kind of feast that carried no thought for who would pay when the night was over. I reached into my purse and pulled out the cash I had brought for emergencies, bills I had saved in case I ever needed them quickly, and I laid them down without hesitation. My hands did not tremble, not once, because I knew this was not weakness, it was choice, and there is a power in choosing how the story ends. I signed the receipt, and then, on the back of it, I wrote my words slowly, pressing each letter deep as though the ink itself needed to carry my resolve. Enjoy this last supper. The card is canceled. The rent too. Let's see who is still laughing tomorrow. I folded the slip and handed it back to the manager, asking him gently to place it on the table once they were done, and I could see in his eyes a flicker of respect, as though he knew this was not just about money, it was about dignity reclaimed. I turned then and walked back out into the night, my steps steady, my heart no longer heavy with humiliation, but with a kind of quiet strength I had almost forgotten was still mine. They thought they had erased me from their table, but what they did not know was that I had already begun to remove myself from their lives. And with every step away from that restaurant, I felt less like the abandoned woman staring through the glass, and more like the one holding the pen to write the ending of her own story. That night when I drove home, the road stretched before me in silence. And though the world outside was calm, inside my mind, every memory of sacrifice came rushing back like waves too strong to hold back. I remembered the mornings I left before sunrise just to clean offices where no one knew my name. The nights I stayed up mending clothes so she would never feel ashamed. The birthdays where my own plate was empty, but hers overflowed. And through it all I carried a hope that one day she would look at me and see not just the giver, but the woman who had given everything. Sitting behind the wheel with the restaurant fading in the distance, I understood that the hope I had carried had been misplaced. Because love without respect is nothing more than hunger. It consumes until there is nothing left but the bones of the one who fed it. By the time I reached my door and stepped back into the stillness of my home, I felt no urge to weep, no need to collapse into a chair, because my pain had already begun to turn into resolve. I set my purse on the table, removed the card from its slot, and held it in my hand, staring at the small piece of plastic that had become a leash tied around my neck. That card had been used more by them than by me, swiped for their pleasures while I lived on modest meals and quiet nights, and now it would serve them no longer. With one call I canceled it, my voice steady, my decision final, and as I hung up the phone I felt a strange kind of peace, as if a weight I had carried for years had finally been lifted. But I did not stop there, because I knew the card was only part of the chain they had wrapped around me. The rent they lived under, the roof they rested so comfortably beneath, it had been mine to provide, mine to allow, and I decided it would no longer be theirs to take for granted. I went to my desk, pulled out the papers they had signed, and with one firm stroke of my pen, I ended their hold on my generosity. Tomorrow, when they woke to find their comfort shaken, it would not be my voice shouting in anger that they heard. It would be the silence of closed doors and canceled favors, the kind of silence that teaches harder than words ever could. That night I sat by the window with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, and though my heart still ached, there was a strength beneath it, steady and sure, because I knew I had finally drawn a line they could not cross again. Morning came slowly, the light creeping through my curtains like it always did, but this time it felt different. It felt as though the world itself knew that something inside me had shifted. I rose from my bed with a steady calm, not rushed, not hurried, but with the certainty of someone who had already made her decision the night before. The phone began to ring before I had even poured my first cup of tea, and when I glanced at the screen I saw her name flashing again and again, desperate, insistent, as if she had only just realized that the well she had drawn from so freely had suddenly run dry. I let it ring, I let it echo through the room, because not every cry deserves an answer. And not every wound can be mended by rushing to pick up the pieces for the very hands that broke them. By the time the messages started pouring in, the words were sharp at first, demanding explanations, accusations that I had betrayed them, twisted attempts to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. But as the hours passed, the tone shifted, panic seeping through the lines, her voice cracking in the voicemails, her husband's anger turning into uncertainty, because they had finally begun to feel the ground beneath them crumble. The card they had used so carelessly no longer worked. The rent they had come to expect like clockwork had vanished, and suddenly, the security they thought was theirs was revealed for what it had always been, mine. I sat there listening to their desperation unfold in the silence of my living room, and though my heart was not made of stone, it did not waver, because I understood that this was not cruelty. It was consequence. Too many times I had given and excused, patched over their disrespect with forgiveness that only invited them to take more. But this time was different. This time, there would be no easy return. I sipped my tea, let the warmth steady my hands, and I told myself that silence was the answer they needed most. Not my words, not my tears, not my pleading for them to change, but the absence of everything they had taken for granted. As the sun climbed higher and the phone continued to light up, I looked around my small home and felt something I had not felt in years, a sense of peace that was mine alone. I realized then that freedom is not always about walking away from strangers or enemies. Sometimes it is about stepping back from the very people you love, the ones who mistake your giving heart for endless supply. And though I knew the storm of their anger and pleading was only beginning, I also knew I was finally strong enough to let it pass without breaking. It did not take long before the silence I held began to draw them closer to my door. And one afternoon, I heard the sound of hurried steps outside, followed by the knock I had always answered without hesitation. This time, I let it echo through the house for a moment before I opened it. And there she was, my daughter, with worry written all over her face. Her husband standing just behind her, his expression tight, with the kind of anger that hides fear. She rushed in before I could even speak, words tumbling out as she demanded to know what I had done, why the rent had not gone through, why the card was suddenly useless, as though I had broken some unspoken contract that bound me to carry their burdens forever. I let her speak. I let every accusation spill out because for once, I was not the one scrambling to explain. When the words finally slowed, I looked at her with the calm that had settled inside me since that night at the restaurant, and I asked her the only question that mattered. How could you do this to me? The room grew quiet then, her voice catching for the first time, her husband shifting uneasily beside her, because the truth in those words left no space for excuses. She tried to stammer about misunderstandings, about intentions, about how it was just one dinner, but I did not let her twist the story into something smaller than it was. I reminded her of every time I had given, of the trust I had placed in her, of the love that had carried me through every sacrifice, and I told her that what hurt most was not the money, but the lie, the deliberate choice to erase me while still using what I had worked my whole life to build. Her husband tried to speak then, to turn the blame on me, to say I was cruel, but I silenced him with nothing more than a steady look. Because cruelty is not found in closing a door that has been abused. It is found in the hands that keep taking while pretending to care. I told them both that my silence had been my answer, that the canceled card and the missing rent were not punishment but boundaries, lines they had crossed too many times before. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my love for an endless account, and now they were learning that even the most giving heart must one day protect itself. The air between us grew heavy, their voices faltering as they realized I would not be swayed, and for the first time in years I felt the balance shift. I was no longer the mother, standing quietly in the shadows. I was the woman who had carried enough, and though my voice never rose, the strength in it left no doubt that the days of taking without respect were over. In the days that followed that confrontation, the ripples of my decision spread further than I had even expected. And it was not just my daughter and her husband who felt the shift, but the entire circle they had drawn around themselves, with my help. Word began to travel quietly through the family. Whispered conversations about why the bills had stopped being paid, why the comforts they had grown so accustomed to had been stripped away so suddenly. And every question eventually found its way back to me. I did not rush to explain. I did not defend myself. I simply let the truth sit there in silence, because sometimes silence speaks with more force than any speech you can prepare. When the extended family gathered one evening, I was invited almost as an afterthought, perhaps in hopes that I would bow under the weight of their stares and offer to restore what had been taken away. I arrived calmly, taking my seat without fuss, and for a moment I could feel the air charged with expectation. All eyes shifting toward me as though waiting for me to apologize for daring to stand my ground. But instead of apology, I opened the folder I had brought with me and laid out the papers one by one, the receipts, the transfers, the rent records, each line showing years of quiet giving, each page a reminder that what they had taken was not theirs by right but by my choice. The room fell into a heavy silence as the truth spread across the table, faces shifting from arrogance to shame, from disbelief to discomfort, and I watched them struggle to meet my eyes. I did not raise my voice, I did not accuse, I simply read aloud the words I had written on that restaurant bill, reminding them that laughter built on lies cannot last, that trust broken once too often will eventually close its doors. My daughter sat frozen, her husband's hand clenched tightly at his side. And for the first time in a long while, I saw uncertainty in their faces, where there had once been only boldness. It was not revenge that filled me in that moment. but a sense of balance restored, because I was no longer carrying their weight alone. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with all the things they could not say, and I let it stretch on, because that silence was my answer, my declaration that the days of being taken for granted were over. I rose then, gathered my papers, and walked out of that room with my head high, leaving behind not anger, but a lesson they would not soon forget. After that night, I returned to my home, and for the first time in years, the silence that greeted me did not feel heavy with loneliness. It felt like peace. It felt like a space that belonged only to me, where no one could twist my kindness into obligation. I sat by the window with the evening settling outside, and I thought of everything that had unfolded. From the moment she told me dinner was canceled, to the moment I laid those papers out for everyone to see. And I realized that what I had carried all along was not just hurt, but proof that I had given far beyond what anyone should have expected. They had lived in comfort because of me. They had laughed freely because I had paid the price, and yet they had believed I was too blind, too desperate for love, to ever close my hands. The days that followed showed me how wrong they had been, for their calls grew fewer when it became clear that my silence would not break, and the tone of their voices changed from anger to pleading, from entitlement to desperation. I listened, but I did not answer, because I understood now that forgiveness cannot be given freely to those who only see it as another gift to be used. Respect is earned, and they had chosen to throw it away the moment they erased me from that table, the moment they toasted with my money while leaving me in the shadows. I thought of my own mother then, the lessons she had whispered to me long ago, that love is not proven by how much you give, but by how gently someone holds what you offer, and I realized I had forgotten that truth until now. So I began to reclaim small parts of myself, the parts I had set aside to provide for them. I planted flowers in the yard that had sat bare for too long. I cooked meals only for myself, and savored every bite without thinking of who else needed feeding. I even allowed myself to rest without guilt, because every breath, every hour of peace was mine to enjoy. I did not do these things out of bitterness, but out of a newfound strength, because I had learned that the quietest form of revenge is not destruction. It is restoration. To take back what was stolen, to live fully without apology, that was the answer I had been searching for all along. And as the nights grew calmer and the mornings brighter, I knew deep inside that I had not only shut them up, I had freed myself. In the end, I came to see that betrayal does not have to be the final chapter. It can be the moment you choose to rise, the moment you decide that love without respect is not love at all. I no longer sit waiting for invitations that never come. I no longer measure my worth by how much I can give. Instead, I hold my head high, knowing that silence and dignity can speak louder than shouting ever could. My daughter may one day understand what she lost that night, or she may never see it. But either way, I have chosen peace, and that is something no one can take from me again. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of my story. I am grateful for your time, and if my words touched your heart, please remember to subscribe so you can hear more of my truths, share this story with someone who needs it, and join me again the next time.